Okay, Charlie. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends, Romans, and countrymen, please lend us both of your ears this afternoon. This is what we want you to do. We want you to get in, sit down, buckle up, because we're going to take you on a ride. Ed, I think Dr. Jensen is frozen up again.
Looks like it. I bet you his voice is okay, though.
Yeah. Dr. Jensen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. A little
Okay.
bit of breaking up, but I can make out what you're saying.
Okay. You're frozen up, but we're going to go ahead and do this thing anyhow.
No, you're good.
All right.
You're back on.
You're loosened up. You're like the Tin Man on The Wizard of Oz. They give you a squirt of oil, and then he starts to move around again. So nonetheless, so ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, whether you're down the street, around the corner, across America, or somewhere around this great big world, thank you for taking the time to tune into the show this afternoon and get those watch parties out there. Share, 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 because this is indeed a message that is relevant for today, and everyone needs to hear this gentleman. My co-host, Ed Temple, out of Columbus, Ohio. Ed, how are you?
Well, you didn't say sidekick, so I'm doing a lot better.
Well, that's good. That's good. And Dr. Scott Jensen / Senator Jensen from the state of Minnesota. Welcome, sir, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for being an American hero. That's what I want to start off with saying.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Jensen, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing today. You're wearing a couple different hats, but go ahead and tell us about some of those things.
Well, I was born in a little town in southern Minnesota, an agricultural community whose major employer was Del Monte Canning Factory, middle child of 5 kids. And it was a town of 3,500 people and a wonderful place to grow up. There were a couple of commandments in Minnesota, or in Sleepy Eye, that I grew up with. One was it takes a village to raise a child, and I was the beneficiary of that. Lots of good people helped steer me straight. And then the other one was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There was always sort of a pragmatism that invaded my life as a young boy growing up in Sleepy Eye. My mom was my best friend and died young of colon cancer, and my dad was my hero. He also died at a relatively young age of colon cancer. I went to the University of Minnesota for undergraduate, and I was in dental school at the U for a year. I was president of the class, but decided that I didn't want to spend my time with teeth. I would rather spend my life working with people's complete body and personality and mind. So I did the logical thing and left dental school and went to the seminary in St. Paul for a year. And during that year, I made 2 decisions. One, I asked my girlfriend to marry me, and we've been together 42 years now. And I elected to go to medical school. In medical school, I finished and pursued a family practice residency, and I've been doing that for 35 years. I practice medicine now in Watertown and Chaska, Minnesota, and I did a Bush Fellowship in skin disease and skin surgery. So I have a strong interest in skin cancer. 5 years ago, I was recruited to run for the Senate, which was not on my radar screen. And it was a, if you will, a whirlwind situation. But I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. In the first month of my Senate service, I was called on to lead the revival of the Minnesota governor who collapsed during his State of the State address. And I've had a chance to carry some big pieces of legislation regarding licensure of pharmacy benefit managers and trying to create an insulin safety net program.
So ever since this coronavirus, I call it a thing, this thing came down upon us, you've been speaking out. You have seen the hypocrisy with politicians, bureaucrats, health officials, and you've been speaking out pretty strongly. In fact, that led up to the medical board in Minnesota investigating you. Is that correct?
Essentially, I started speaking when the governor of Minnesota chose to extend the lockdown or the stay-at-home order without allowing the legislature to play a part in that extension. And we've had ongoing disagreements in the legislature since then. But on April 3rd, I received a communication from the Minnesota Department of Health with a link to the CDC. And in that communication, it felt to me like I was being encouraged and coached to be more liberal in terms of using COVID-19 as the cause of death on death certificates. I've been practicing medicine for 35. I've never received this kind of communication coaching me how to do it. And in the communication, there were words and phrases that seemed to go against the grain of a death certificate. I was always raised that a death certificate should be strongly thought out sequence of causation, starting with the initiating event and move through the events that had happened with a patient that brought about their demise. But in this communication from the Department of Health, it indicated that if you assumed that it was COVID-19 or you thought it was probable or reasonable, or if you thought it contributed, that you could go ahead and put it down as the cause of death. And this wasn't jiving with me, so I raised it up the flagpole on a news program with Chris Berg on April 11th, and it became somewhat of a lightning rod and hit a nerve. And a day or two later, I was on news, and we talked about it further then. And ever since then, I've been sort of thrown into the limelight and taking on issues of death certificate completion, diagnosing COVID-19. Are we overcounting or undercounting? Also, I've had concerns about personal health information being distributed too readily in Minnesota without individual patients. And I've also been concerned about executive orders on the parts of governor being gross expansion of government far beyond the intent of the Constitution. Then at the end of June, I received a letter from the Board of Medical Practice in Minnesota with a big stamp on the back of the letter saying confidential. And in it, I was informed that I was being investigated for 2 allegations based on public comments I had made. The first was because I'd criticized the Department of Health, I was accused of spreading misinformation. And because I was willing to compare COVID-19 to influenza outbreaks, I was providing advice. So over the next 10 days, I prepared a response, 5,000 words, 8 pages, 8 pages of attachments, explaining why both of these allegations were false. And approximately 1 month later, last Monday, 7 days ago, I received an email from the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice indicating that they had conducted an investigation and had dismissed allegations and no action was to be taken.
That's good.
Ed?
Yep. Okay, so let me go ahead and hit you on a few of these. So obviously, well, let's just talk about this real quick. Do you think medicine is being politicized? Do you think the medical field is being politicized?
Ed, you cut out a little bit there. Was your question, do I think medical professionals have been politicized?
Yeah. Do you think the profession is being politicized with respect to the virus?
I think, unfortunately, your question is spot on. I think that the medical profession is becoming more political. And when I first started medical school in 1978, with fond memories, I remember being at grand rounds and tumor conferences and Friday morning conferences. And we went to these things not to necessarily celebrate a kumbaya moment where we all slapped each other in the back and said, it's wonderful to agree. We went questioning and inquisitively looking for better answers, better approaches to patients' very real problems, whether it was a cancer tumor or whether it was difficult to diagnose rash or whether it was a very complex cardiac condition. But medicine has always led the way in terms of inquisitiveness and, if you will, promoting skepticism and utilizing the Socratic method of teaching so that we might derive a more thorough understanding. I think we're losing that in medicine. Physicians fracture and divide from one another. It's interesting to me that physicians have decided that to cheerlead for this perspective or that perspective.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that even on the question of masks, the science that we've been teaching medical students and residents for the last 20 years was relatively casually disregarded in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic without necessarily being replaced by good randomized controlled trials or blinded studies. So I do worry about the medical profession having moved in a direction that may not serve our patients better in the days to come.
Yes, and so do you, with the fact that it's being politicized, the funny thing is, or not, it's not really funny, but they keep saying, why don't we listen to the quote unquote experts? Well, if the pediatricians are saying get the kids back in school, who are the experts besides them? I'm confused.
Well, I think I would want to make it clear the American Academy of Pediatrics has issued statements and medically based philosophies in the past that I haven't always agreed with. And that's okay. I think that's healthy. But I thought when the American Academy of Pediatricians came out and said, we really think it's critical to get kids back to school as soon as possible, that should have been a powerful statement for any bureaucrat, politician, or academic leader to listen to very carefully, because the AAP didn't come to that conclusion casually. And I think that we had many other organizations saying the same thing as the American Academy of Pediatrics. I think that we, a variety of school administrators, parent groups, and many others recognize that we need to get kids back in school. Distance learning comes nowhere near face-to-face teaching in terms of efficacy and trying to shrink that achievement gap that troubles so many of us.
And isn't it's I find it very curious to why we always we tend to say the Europeans are doing this, the Europeans are doing that. Now all of a sudden the Europeans are saying we're going back to school, and here we are shutting everything down. I'm a little confused. Why all of a sudden are they no longer influencing us when it comes to this?
Well, I think great question. I think that it does point a little bit, and I hesitate to say this because it might open a can of worms, but I think it points a little bit to a certain arrogance on our part that we know best, and that if we're not leading and someone else is, that they are mistaken. You look at the study between Finland and Sweden in terms of what they did with their schools. Mm-hmm. Sweden did not close their schools. Finland did. Finland reopened their schools 2 months later, and they did not find a surge of COVID-19, nor did they find any conclusive evidence that the children were spreading COVID-19 to the faculty or to the teachers. I think we need to learn more from our European counterparts. We do this even with research. American physicians tend to be a little too cocky about our research. There's good research being done in Germany, France, the Scandinavian countries, England, and many other places that I've probably forgotten and neglected to mention. But too often, American physicians and American academic centers look to them.
So true, so true. Got a little cut out there. We'll wait. I'm sure it'll come back on here in just a second.
There he is.
Okay.
Yeah, so your point's well taken that, obviously we are a little bit arrogant and for some good reason. I mean, but at the same time, we need to, take in all information. And so with respect to that, what do you think about Dr. Fauci? What's your take on him?
Well, Dr. Fauci has made tremendous contributions, in a career of service, but I have been honestly surprised at the fact that sometimes he makes comments that I think could be more measured. I think sometimes just because a journalist asks you a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. You can indicate that we don't know the answer to that, or we don't know enough to speak to that question. I think we probably should say more often, I don't know, or we're in the steep end of the learning curve on that, rather than shooting off and saying that that's just noise, or it's a conspiracy theory, or that we can't possibly have a vaccination program be successful for at least 12 to 18 months, or that, go ahead and go on a cruise, there's no problem. I mean, it's one statement after another, and I just think that he could be a bit more measured. But to be fair, maybe I should be a bit more measured too.
Well, to that point, we talked earlier in the pre-show about the doctors on the frontline doctors who, if you Google search them, they don't pop up. It's very interesting how that works. You have to kind of find their hidden website. But what do you think about what they're saying about the cure? Being that the what is it? Why can't I ever say it?
The hydrochloric.
Yeah, hydrochloroquine.
Yeah.
So you're asking a little bit about what do I think about America's frontline doctors group with their White Coat Summit and their comments on the hydroxychloroquine.
Correct.
Yes.
Let me go ahead and make a couple of comments. If we use a medication at a certain point in time during a disease course, it may be very successful for that disease. If we use it at a different time in the course of disease, it may not be successful at all. We see this frequently in medicine. To my way of thinking, hydroxychloroquine as both an anti-inflammatory agent and as an immune modulator is intriguing. We've seen this for some time. We know that it's enjoyed a safe profile. It's been around for 65 years. It's been used for many people to treat malaria, to prevent malaria, to treat lupus, to treat rheumatoid arthritis. My wife has been on hydroxychloroquine for 15 years, so I have a high level of comfort with it. But whether or not it's going to play a significant role in COVID-19 as things unfold and evolve, I don't know. But I know that there's enough conflicted information about it that I don't think we should be casually throwing it out the window saying that it has no value. I think that we need to keep having a dialogue. We need to not dismiss someone's viewpoint on it just because it doesn't up with our own. There is a certain conflict between the makers of remdesivir, Gilead, and hydroxychloroquine. I mean, this doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if the only show in town is going to possibly be Gilead's product, remdesivir, then that bodes well for its stock price. But if hydroxychloroquine comes along and says, gee, we can carve out a fair amount of this COVID-19 market because if we're used early on in the disease, we can make it so that potentially the number of people that need to be admitted to the hospital with COVID-19 is reduced, and the number of people that might be candidates for remdesivir might be reduced. You can see the potential conflict. And it is important to remember that remdesivir has never received FDA approval for any medical condition. It has received an emergency use authorization.
Well, that opens up another can of worms. What do you think about when they legalized Dr. I'm sure you've heard of Francis Boyle, Fab. He initials are Fab, but Francis Boyle, and he said that that the whole virus was mutated from one country to another, and the United States was part of it, China was part of it, and you can go through the list: France, Russia, and then of course they spun in some things they shouldn't have as well. But he said all of this is really rooted in the fact of them making it legal for public universities to get patents and earn money from patents. And do you think there's that is a concern that we have, that now that universities are, basically doesn't that make them more or less trustworthy because they have a vested financial interest in it now?
When you're talking billions and billions of dollars, and you look at some of the examples of corporate behavior that we've seen, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, whereby they might be making hundreds of thousands of dollars on each week, comes up with an adverse reaction that potentially should cause that product and its sales to be suspended. And it's not. We've seen that before.
Right.
When you look at this situation with remdesivir and what this will mean to the Gilead company, when each course of treatment is $3,000, while a course of treatment for hydroxychloroquine will be $10. Yes. Do I think that this plays a part? Without being a conspiracy theory person, I don't see myself that way.
Right.
Yes, I think this can play a part. Dollars do drive corporate behaviors in wrong directions sometimes.
Dr. Jensen, you're in the medical arena, the political arena, so you see things from different places that most of us don't see. My question is, we hear from the so-called experts, but why is it we only hear from that side of the experts? For instance, why are good medical people that's had years of training in all different types of field in the medical profession, why are they being shut down on YouTube, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Why are they being censored? Why are they being almost more or less blackballed? Why is that?
It's a good question. Why are we leaning so heavily into bureaucrats and politicians and academic types that aren't necessarily in the field? It's frustrating. I don't have the answer. My answer would be based more on conjecture. But I look at some of the people that have, if you will, addressed a more contrarian narrative, a more skeptical narrative. I look at Dr. John Ioannidis and Dr. Scott Atlas out of Stanford. I look at physicians like Dr. Erickson out of California are in the trenches. I look at Dr. Simone Gold, who's working in the emergency rooms. I look at lots of these folks and I see their voices being discounted. It is frustrating, and you have to wonder if politics hasn't taken a larger role. I've been asked, why would people do that? And I don't think it's any particularly brilliant insight on my part to say that fear is an effective way to control people, because I think it does control people. I think we should have more in the trenches kind of physicians involved, viral infectious disease specialists, people that are a little bit distanced from the world of politics. The world of politics does change you, and And it's probably changed me in ways that I don't realize either. Sometimes when you enter the world of politics, if someone sticks a microphone in front of you, you perhaps change the context and the words that you might normally use. And disappointing.
If I might use a crude example, of course, Espenlaub has been known to be somewhat rude and crude, but nonetheless, I did a tour and a half in Vietnam, and we had what we called, and God bless them, we had what we called 90-day wonders, where back in that day, these fellows would go through Quantico, officers candidate school, and in 90 days, because of what was going on, they would be on the battlefield. 90-day wonders. I watched in that 19 months that I spent in Vietnam, I watched many of them come, many of them go, but I noticed that each and every one of them, when they came, now there was a couple that would come in, and they had this attitude that I know what's going on, I know how to do this, blah, 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 blah. It only took the first firefight for them to find out in the very first seconds that they didn't know anything of what they thought they knew anything about. And so they relied on the old grunts. They relied on the guys that were in the trenches. They relied on the guys that's been there, done that, the guys that's run the patrols, the guys that went on the search and destroy missions, the fellows that were there grunting it through the jungle. That's what puzzles me so much. And it actually makes me angry that these politicians, these bureaucrats, it's all one-sided. It's all one-sided. They act like we don't have no common sense out here. As far as going to school,
thank you.
I hear you saying, yes, we should open the schools. I hear countless people saying, medical people, open the schools, open the schools, open the schools. But at the same time, the teachers' unions, many of the teachers, many of the parents are panic stricken. As you said, that it was laid on the altar of panic. They are panic stricken. They throw their hands up. They say, I don't know what to do. So if I don't know what to do, I'm not going to do nothing. I'm not going to send my kid back to school. Is there not so much confusion and fear, as you said, that is just running rampant across this nation until we're actually paralyzed?
I apologize, George, that there was quite a bit of cutout for me, but I think that one of the embedded questions was you look at the bigger picture and consider elements like common sense and normal human behavior and fear, and how does that all mix together as we try to deal with this COVID-19 pandemic. I would say this: I think fear does paralyze us. And I think that sometimes people in power utilize that fear to control people even more. I've often said that physicians are very good at chemistry and biology and mathematics, but they aren't necessarily filled with sense. My wife was in veterinary school when I was in medical school. So every night I would have a chance to hear from my wife what they were doing in veterinary school, and she would have a chance to hear from me what was going on in medical school. And frankly, I was always dumbstruck by how sensible the veterinarians were, and how sometimes the medical students heads in the clouds. And I think that if we want common sense to help us navigate a way through this pandemic, we need to lean into the common sense of the everyday, every man and every woman. And we're not doing that. Instead, we're sort of marginalizing the everyday folks out there who are having to live with these heavy-handed policy decisions coming down from on high. I think it's really going to cost us, because the lockdowns and some of the things that have happened that we may well look back on and say, they made no sense.
Right.
But we're going to pay the consequences for years and possibly decades to come. So I agree with you. The common sense, the greatest source of common sense is the citizens of the United States at large. We're not tapping into them. We're actually putting them down.
Yeah. So what do you think about, you alluded to it, but I wanted to get you to maybe expand on what you were talking about with the masks. Tell us, what do you think about the kids wearing masks in school, for example? Do you think that's necessary, or is it counterproductive, or what do you think about that?
I think we are inadvertently conducting a gigantic social experiment on our children. We are going to take a big chunk of the formative years of kids, especially kids between 5 and 10 years of age. We're scaring the daylights out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Parents talk about nothing but COVID-19. They see masks and can't see beyond the mask whether or not there's a smile from that adult or not. Telling them that they can distance learn through a computer. And quite frankly, this society is already overwhelmed with technology, and we are losing the ability to build human-to-human relationships. And then we tell the 6-year-olds that you've got to wear a mask. And then we got to tell the 6-year-old, oh, and if you're not comfortable with it, too bad, those are the rules. I think that if you look at and talk to most pediatrics and counselors, they will tell you one of the most important things to becoming a well-balanced adult is to try to minimize experiences. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. And we are overloading our children with adverse childhood experiences, and we will pay a price for this. There will be increase in anxiety, will be increases in suicide, and there already are in other cohort groups. There will be increases in loss of dream, increases in autism, increases in antisocial personality. We know these will happen.
And you've been a senator. What's this? You're going on your 4th year.
Yes, I've been in the Senate. This is my 4th year.
And you're not going to go back. This is it. You're going to do the 1 term and then you're going to move on. Or has that been 2 terms, by the way?
I am not running for re-election to the Senate. That's correct.
Okay, and so I guess where I'm going with that is, what have you learned about as a senator? Is it what everybody thinks it is? Is it corrupt? Is it is it a place where these guys are getting everyone's bought off and paid, or is there some civility there, or is it a little bit of each?
It's a bizarre place being in the world of the politicians. I think that I would say that on the one hand, we operate frequently out of fear because of the next election. So there's too much attention given to voters and dollars. And when we allow fear to deter us from having the challenging conversations that the citizenry might be asking for, we end up disrespecting the public by not having the challenging conversations. And I don't care what you're talking about. I don't care if you're talking about decriminalizing trivial amounts of marijuana possession, or if you're talking about gun control, or if you're talking about 19, or the price of pharmaceuticals. If the public says, we want a conversation, I think that it's the elected officials that should be making certain that that happens. And we don't do that. We don't have enough of an appetite for more nation, and we don't have enough courage to go where things might feel like they get out of hand. And we're so frightened of the next election. That's why I'm a big advocate for term limits.
Yes.
Why are you, and I just was curious about this. I don't want to guess, but why are you so rare? Why are you able to speak out, or why are you in a position where you're so brave? How did you become this American hero where you can speak out and so very few do?
I came up with a saying a few years ago that if you want to care more, you might have to care less. And I frankly could care less about any political future I may or may not have. And I think if I care less about that, then I can care more about what I think I'm hearing my constituents and the citizens I represent, what I hear them asking me to talk about. So quite frankly, I could care less about a lot of the things I'm supposed to care. And in so doing, I think I get to care more about what people want to hear about. And I don't mean to sound all rosy and glamorous, but frankly, being a family doc's the best job a guy could have. So there's nothing better. I'm not looking for a better political career. If I do something in politics again down the road, it's because I feel called to do it by my creator.
Okay, well, I have somebody listening to the show that you just mentioned. It's a great profession, and she wants to do exactly what you're doing. She wants to be a family doctor. And my question to you is, her concern is that, hey, I'm going to be a doctor, but if I wait till I'm 30 to have kids, that's going to be I'm losing my biological, the biological clock is ticking. What do you have do you have any information you give her on that? Any way that she could manage being a doctor and at the same time, not worried about being too old to have kids and start a family or to start too early and mess up her medical career?
Ed, I was hearing the other word. I apologize. I did not get that question.
I guess what I was saying is if a young girl, she's going into medical school and she eventually wants to have a family, and obviously to become a doctor, she's going to be, 30 years old before she starts. Should she be concerned about having children that late?
Hey, I think I've got your question. Again, there's quite a bit of interference, but perhaps I could just comment on my two daughters. Daughters are physicians. One of them has two children. The other has one child, but is going to have another child so they'll each have two. They're both exceptional physicians, and they've been able to thread that needle of being able to finish medical school and a residency around the age of 30 and move into their first job and find a way to balance family and their career. I think we need to be more sensitive in our society as to the special challenges that female physicians have, because they are, if you will, solely endowed with the ability to procreate and bring into existence the next generation. And I think that we have gotten away and make certain that it's in place everywhere, that women can somehow thread that needle, have children, and not see their career slowed or, if you will, unable to be as successful as if they hadn't chosen to have children. We need to do a better job on that.
Fair enough.
Dr. Jensen, I look at it this way. Up until March, we were just going along merrily on our way. Eat, drink, and be merry, and, la-di-da-di-da-di-do. And then this thing come upon us. People are facing challenges now that they have never seen before in their life. Hard times where, for the most part, people aren't geared up for hard times or things out of the ordinary. This is just my opinion, and you can give me yours. I'm afraid that we have been so lackadaisical over the years that we just pretty much accepted that things are the way they are, and they're always going to be that way, and they're good, and let's have a good time. I'm not worried about the political situations. My vote don't count. I don't matter. Whatever I say don't matter. They'll take care of it. And I'm afraid that we we the people, as stated, we the people have allowed ourselves to end up in the mud puddle, so to speak, because we were so content with the way things were. And now all of a sudden, and with the fear and the chaos and the confusion that's sweeping the nation, people are even more afraid to stand up and take their stand. What would you say? And that's my opinion. What would you say to the American people today about standing up, voicing out, putting the boots on the ground, and let's get something done? Go to these legislative bodies. What would you say?
I'm sorry, I hear that question.
With all the with people almost cowering in fear, what would you tell the American people? What can they do to get the attention of some of these scallywags? I call them scallywags. What should they do to get the attention of some of these scallywags, put their boots on the ground and do something? What would you tell the American people? Wasn't coming through. Okay.
We can put it on the.
Is there any way to put the question on the chat board?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, put it up there, Ed.
What
I will go
is-
make a comment while that question's being put on the chat board.
Yes.
I will just say this is something that's entirely new for this country, and I think we have generational challenges. If you look at the generation that's from the ages of, say, 65 and older, and I'm 65, few of us now, because of time, few of us served in World War II. Many may have served in Vietnam and Korea, but that's a different mindset than perhaps the group of people today, 25 and under. And we have that other group of 1975 to 2001, where there had been no Vietnam War, but there was 9/11. So we're going to have to be kind to one another and understand that we all bring differences to the table. And if we just hear someone expressing a viewpoint that's different than our own, and we hold them in contempt, we're not going to get anywhere. Stephen Covey wrote a book, and in it, I think it was 7 Habits,
highly effective people.
7 of effective people or something. But he had one in there. He said, "Seek first to understand, then be understood." We do that very well today, and we need to more than ever. Instead of just answering someone who differs from an angry arrogance, we need to ask them, "I don't see it the way you do. Help me understand where you're coming from." We're just not doing that. And social media doesn't help. The amount of people that seem to derive particular enjoyment from being snarky on social media, it's a good sized number. And I think the name calling and the accusations and the fear mongering, I don't think that's going to help us get through this. COVID-19 is transformational, intergenerational crisis that somehow we have got to build bridge one another within families, within generations. And if we don't, we're going to pay a deeper price than we have. Yeah. And for sure, we're going to pay a deep price.
There's the question on the screen, Dr. Jensen. What is your advice for America? If you can see it.
For Americans would be listen more, talk less, wake up in the morning, get on your knees, and ask God for the ability to show a kindness and a thankfulness that you thought beyond your capability. In other words, Whatever level of kindness and thankfulness you normally reflect in a given day, do more than that. Because whatever you're doing isn't enough. Because collectively, what we are doing isn't
One of those days, George.
thought possible.
Dr. Jensen, in closing, could you tell us that quote? Being courageous is brave. How do you say it? Do you know which one I'm saying?
Care less. Quote.
No, the other one. He has it in his emails about being courageous.
Yes, I know what you mean. I think what I said is courage isn't being brave without fear. Right. Courage is being brave with fear. And I think that sometimes people are paralyzed by fear, and then they think less of themselves and think of themselves as less capable. I think we all need to acknowledge, or at least I certainly will, some of the times I've learned the most and maybe served my patients the best was when I found myself in a situation with a patient, whether it was a surgery or trying to evaluate someone for a potential cancer. It's when I served them, not because I didn't have any fear, but because I did have fear, and I said, I'm going to plow through this. I think we need to recognize that we're most courageous when we somehow find a way to be brave, even when we're fearful.
Very well said. Very well said. And we should all take that to heart. Ed, in closing.
I would just say thank you. We got through a lot of. I've had 18 questions there. I think you hit them all. So I really appreciate the fact, like I said from the beginning of the show, you're an American hero. It's very unusual for a doctor or anybody for that matter nowadays.
I lost all audio for a while there when you were asking me about courage. Everything was normal.
Yeah, I was just saying that you're an American hero in that we appreciate what you're doing, what you have done, what you continue to do, your advice, because guess what? There's very few people nowadays that are willing to stand up.
Yes.
And so we appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen, for taking the time out of such a busy schedule. I hope we can have you come back again soon.
I would love to be back again, and thank the two of you, George and Ed, for such a practical conversation, the kind of conversation that I, as a young person in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, grew up with in the 1960s and 70s as we dealt with civil rights, and we dealt with the Vietnam War, and we dealt with impeachment proceedings and Watergate. We had conversation, you two smack of that kind of time, so thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends, Romans, and countrymen, whether you're down the street, around the corner, across America, or somewhere around this great big world, I hope you enjoyed this afternoon. I almost said this morning. It's this afternoon. Oh, my. So wherever you're at, no matter what time it is, if it's nighttime, you have a great night. If it's daytime, you have a great day. But regardless, do a couple things for us. Take care of one another. Look after one another. Don't ever be afraid to look somebody in the eye and tell them, I love you. It could possibly save a life. So until next time, from Ed, Dr. Jensen, and myself, thank you very, very much. And we pray that God will keep you right in the center of his hand. Thank you.
All right.